Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carta's virtual event, the Policy Playbook, How the 2024 Elections Could Shape Private Markets Policy. As you all know, policy is playing an increasingly big role in the innovation economy. We have 3 months until this upcoming election, so we wanted to bring expertise together to elaborate on what's happening and what it means for private markets and private capital. So today we're going to walk through the election landscape and how governing and policymaking on things like tax, capital markets, and aspects of technology policy will affect you. So before we begin, let's introduce our two experts. First, we've got with us today my colleague at Carta, Holly Hiles-Pandel, who's Senior Counsel for Policy with the team. Before joining Carta, she served as Head of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and prior to that, served as Senior Counsel for the House Financial Services Committee. We're also joined today by Brian McGuire, who's Policy Director at Brownstein, a top law firm and lobbying shop. Prior to joining Brownstein, he served in the role of Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Legislative Affairs, during which time he worked on the implementation of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And prior to that, he served as Chief of Staff to Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. So we've got great experts with us today and excited about the conversation. So let's dive in. Brian, let's start with you. On the presidential side, we've obviously seen an incredibly volatile race, which now seems to have been reset with Vice President Kamala Harris taking the top of this ticket on the Democratic side, facing off against former President Trump. How is this shaping out, and what trends and what should people be paying attention to determine the trends?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. The race has completely reshaped itself since the announcement by President Biden that he would be stepping aside, and the party coalescing then around Kamala Harris, as you say. What I would be looking for is the polling in a handful of states in particular, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Those are the states that Trump won in 2016 that he then lost in 2020. Before the announcement by President Biden that he'd be stepping aside from the presidential race, all of those states were trending strongly in Trump's direction, looking like a repeat of 2016 in terms of his electoral roll-up. Since then, polls are showing those states all tightening. And then in a recent Fox Battleground poll showing at least one state in addition to those flipping in favor of a Harris win, that being Minnesota. But those states in particular, the ones I'd be watching closely to, nobody knows whether this bump is artificial or has staying power great enough to carry Harris through the election. That's a real unknown right now. But those are the states that I'd be watching, and the clear shift and tightening in those states has to be very concerning to the Trump team. We're sort of at a pre-Biden-Trump debate moment right now, where things are almost in a dead heat in terms of the polling, and Democrats have clearly corrected the situation that they were facing, which was almost certain defeat prior to President Biden's withdrawing from the race.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it's perhaps an unfair question, but when you talk about determining whether this is maybe a temporary bump for Vice President Harris and Democrats now getting more and more engaged on this, is there a timeline that you'd watch on that, or any specific events where you'd say, no, this seems to have some staying power or permanence?
So traditionally, voters tend to check in a real way after Labor Day. If we see post-Labor Day polling that's similar to what we're seeing today, then I think the Trump campaign would hit the panic button somewhat, or at least, double down on some of the messaging that they think is effective. And the Harris campaign would be expected to do the same thing. But I would start to grow concerned about this not being an artificial bump if you're seeing polling, 10 days after Labor Day that looks like today's polling.
Yeah. And obviously everybody's watching this very closely because there has been so volatile, but we've still got 3 months between now and election day. That's a lifetime of politics. Presidential race, a little bit of uncertainty, quite a bit of uncertainty, I should say. It feels like if you're looking at the Senate, there's a little bit more predictability potentially in some of that. Can you walk us through how you're seeing that unfold?
Sure. So the Senate currently has a one seat majority for Democrats. It's widely acknowledged that heading into November, we're essentially even at 50-50 with Joe Manchin announcing his retirement and not running for reelection in West Virginia, and the popular incumbent governor running for his seat, Jim Justice. That's expected to be a pickup for Republicans, putting us at 50-50. So the outcome of the presidential election, given that likelihood, will determine if you leave all the other states and potential pickup opportunities aside, that puts us even in the Senate, 50-50 Republican Democrat. So you're starting there. If Harris were to win, she would obviously have the tie-breaking vote in her vice president. And if Republicans were to win, and all other things being equal, they would have the tie-breaking vote. Beyond West Virginia, the two likeliest pickup opportunities for Republicans, and they are good pickup opportunities for Republicans, are Montana, I would say, in first place, with Tim Sheehy being a very strong opponent to John Tester in Montana. Tester has been very successful politically in a fairly red state, but Sheehy is a stronger opponent than he's had in his last two elections. So I think there's a good likelihood that Republicans pick up Montana as well. And then Ohio, I would put in second place as a high likelihood Trump will win Ohio decisively, as he did in 20 and 16. And the question is whether Sherrod Brown's brand as a politician is strong enough to carry him through those headwinds, similar to what Susan Collins was able to do in the last cycle in winning Maine, which went for the Democrat, went for Harris Biden. That's an open question. Sherrod Brown has been, winning elections in Ohio since 1974, so I don't discount his ability to pull it off. But it is an increasingly red state, and Bernie Moreno is a pretty good candidate. I don't think they've landed any serious punches against him yet. It's really a name recognition issue there. He's got to win 90% of Trump voters. And most of those people know who Sherrod Brown is. They don't know who Bernie Moreno is. So he's got a job to do in raising his name ID in this contest between now and November.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think from a broader mechanical perspective, for those that aren't living and breathing this as closely as some of us might be, when you think about elections, the Senate has a third of its members up every cycle versus the entire chamber. And of those kind of 33 or 34, depending upon the year, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, like 11 of those seats are really in contention, and 9 of those really are the Democratic seats defending. And to your point, there's a few that are really, really tough races versus, for the most part, Republicans seem to be just being able to play offense versus having to defend any of their major seats. And that's why, and again, keep me honest here, there's kind of a sentiment here that unless Democrats run the table in the White House, the Senate likely switches to Republican control.
Correct. And if they don't, then they'll be in the wilderness for a long time because given that cycle that you just described, Republicans do not have very good prospects in the next two cycles for picking up seats. So this is really Republicans' shot in terms of recapturing the Senate. They have a very good opportunity to do so. I would say on the question of how the top of the ticket affects these Senate races, it does, but the Senate races are a little less sensitive to the top of the ticket than the House races are. And the Senate races should be evaluated on their own terms and not necessarily closely in connection with the top of the ticket. It matters, but I don't think it's going to be decisive, especially in states like Montana and Ohio, where Republicans have a very good chance of picking up those two seats.
Yeah, that's helpful. But let's switch to where that top of the ticket might matter more, and every member's up every 2 years. Holly, obviously the House is also in contention. We've got Republican control now, but a tough election coming up for both sides as they fight for who will run the majority. What does it look like there?
So similar to the race for the White House, I think the House is in more of that toss-up category at this point. And to Brian's point, I think it is definitely linked to who's at the top of the ticket. Republicans currently have a very slim majority, and Democrats only need to flip 4 seats to retake control. If you look at the leading polling aggregators, while all 435 members are on the ballot, the House battleground is actually really small. There's around 70, quote, competitive races, but 22 of these are toss-up seats, which are evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. Again, we're looking at this race as a coin flip at this point. On balance, Democrats have more, quote unquote, competitive races on the map, but these districts are ones that are largely going to favor president, or these districts are ones that that President Biden carried previously. So they're going to favor the Democrats more. Republicans, however, are defending a larger number of what they call crossover districts. These are districts that have a Republican in the seat, but President Biden won in 2020. And Republicans are also defending seats in traditional Democratic strongholds like California and New York. So election day turnout, that's all going to impact the trajectory of these races. And Republicans can't, the math doesn't work. Republicans can't keep the House majority unless they win some of these seats. That being said, while the map may favor Democrats slightly, I think whichever party is ultimately wins the White House, is in control there, will likely carry the House along. But similar to the margins today, I think whichever party wins will have a pretty small governing majority, which presents its own challenges, which I'm sure we will get to in this program.